This one was wild and it almost broke me, so I'm excited to show you the results and the whole process. But first, let's start from the beginning. This is my epic quest to recreate Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings.
Every great quest has a beginning, where everything is fresh and new. Our 3D artist is full of optimism and excitement about what this project could become. He is excited to learn new things and push his capabilities. But along with this hope comes fear. Fear that he won't survive, that he won't make it to the end. But just as Bilbo gave Frodo the ring, YouTube has given Adam a comment, a challenge. He has to accept it. There is simply no other choice. There is nothing left for him but to set off modelling boxes, cylinders, splines, all in the hopes that someday, eventually, it will become Minas Tirith.
In my last video, I made a critical mistake. Or let me know what else you'd like to see me recreate. I'd love to do another one of these. I asked what people wanted to see me build next, and I actually read the comments. So now I've been absolutely buried in 3D for the last month, recreating Minas Tirith from Lord of the Rings. After working out the basic size and shape of everything, I then started focusing on the outer wall because I knew that was going to set the tone for the rest of the model. And of course, there was a ton of modeling to do and a lot of things kind of repeat. So I wanted to get the style, size, the look, everything of that outer wall just right so I could apply it to the rest of the city as well. Once again, just like with Hogwarts, the thing that stands out with the modeling here is not how complex it is the scale. The epic scale of this city is the hard part. There's so much, and it's hard to add details in the right places because it's just so huge. Honestly, it was just a grind to get all this done. There's no way around it other than to just dive in and do it. And of course, I use 3ds Max for that. You'll see me modeling there throughout the video. The modeling took me forever. When I used to work in a studio full of 3D artists, my boss used to harp on me all the time, telling me to quit staring at my screen while watching renderings. But hey, this is a personal project, so I can render as much as I want. So as per usual, I started rendering previews right away in V-Ray. Cause hey, I like to see what it's gonna look like. The model's looking super cool. I can add a V-Ray dirt material here, which really articulates all the ins and outs of the model. And I think it looks good. Now, in Unreal Engine, a lot of this stuff won't translate, so we'll have to see how that works out when I get to that point. But now, a bunch more modeling.
Little did Adam know that the model would be just the beginning. He had no idea of what lay ahead.
One thing I should mention is where I'm getting reference and inspiration for this model. It's not easy because it's an entire city, but there is one handy thing, and that is the fact that Weta Workshop made a miniature of this, and there's a bunch of pictures of the miniature all over the internet, and it matches what was made as a much bigger miniature model for the film. And of course, I had to watch the films just to get a little bit inspired and to make sure I don't make any huge blunders. Yeah, I'm not up on all my latest Lord of the Rings lore or anything like that. So the thing that stands out in these movies is the world building. The world building done by Peter Jackson, by Weta, and by Tolkien himself is kind of mind-blowing. It's huge and there's so much culture worked into it. It's just awesome. And the good news is that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to build a world in Unreal Engine 5. So yeah, watching the movies was great. Best research assignment ever. But two things to keep in mind there. The movies are humongous. I mean, I watched for 12 hours straight the director's cut versions of these things. So there's a lot of information there. Really, it's the third one, Return of the King, that has a lot of Minas Tirith in it. And they're doing a lot of tricks, not really showing the city too much. But the miniature model is really helpful. But again, I mean, there's a lot of different interpretations of what Minas Tirith should look like. There's the book, and then there's the movie, and then there's a bunch of things in between. I'm mostly following the movie, but again, I take a lot of artistic license that you'll see throughout this video. My main goal is that it looks cool and that it's recognizable as Minas Tirith. This actually comes up in my work all the time because I work with architects and their main concern is always that my renderings are displaying their design properly, perfectly, and accurately. And I try to explain to them, no, the goal here is to show something that basically represents your building, but to get the maximum wow factor out of the image. So there's that constant balance. How accurate do you need to be versus how much artistic license you can take to have maximum visual impact. Speaking of maximum visual impact, it is time already to take this into Unreal Engine 5. I got a comment on my last video like, hey, I would have taken this into Unreal Engine sooner so I know what my shots are going to be, and then I know where to put all my focus. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. Plus, I love working in real time anyway, so here we go. So I translate it effortlessly into Unreal Engine using Datasmith like normal. I love that workflow, but like I mentioned already, not all my V-Ray information comes across, and I'll talk more about that later and kind of how I addressed it. Another thing I did here that was new for me is integrate a whole bunch of new plugins and assets purchased from the marketplace, and I'll talk a lot more about that too as we go on. But first, I want to talk about ultra dynamic skies here. This again, while we're on the topic of comments that I got on my last video, this was something someone said, you gotta use this, man, and I had already seen it and I thought I do need to use that because it gives you way more control over the sky. You can add weather effects, you can animate the clouds, and just add that more lifelike sky and environment to your scene. But possibly even more important than that is the fact that I can have like complete control over what my sky is going to look like. And I love that because that's going to be a huge part of this scene. So of course, I immediately set off to start setting the proper mood for my scene. Even though my model's still basic, I love the part of setting up the mood for my shots. Ultra dynamic skies was huge in that respect. And of course, I had to use Easy Fog again to add even more atmosphere. I loved it so much with my Hogwarts video that I used it again. And one cool thing is that Easy Fog actually comes with a sample mountain as well. And I used it as a placeholder. It looked good for establishing what I wanted my shots to be. I didn't end up using it in the final. We'll talk about that later. What I really wish is that I knew how to make super custom terrain and mountains and stuff. That would be awesome. I think it would have contributed to this project a lot, but that's for another day. At this point, I was just trying to avoid going back into 3ds Max at all costs. And so I just stayed in Unreal Engine and kept going, adding in Megascans and stuff, building out my cliff, because 3ds Max sucks. Just kidding, it doesn't. I'm a big fan of 3ds Max. But people in the comments, they seem to think it sucks. But my real thing is that I just got sick of modeling and wanted to come in and start checking it out in Unreal. That's all that's going on here. So yeah, instead of going back to modeling, I break up the monotony by screwing around in Unreal Engine, and then I just go back and forth throughout the project to keep myself engaged. And I even use some of the modeling tools in Unreal Engine this time, just to help me out a little bit, like slicing up these Megascans, objects, capping them, simple stuff like that. One person in the comments actually suggested that 3ds Max was so wrong for this job that any basic architectural software could do it like 10 times faster. And I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely not true. I know every architectural modeling software there is, and if that was true, I'd be adopting a different one today. And I discuss this a lot in the comments, like there's the Blender versus 3ds Max thing. A lot of people saying, I could do this way faster in Blender. Maybe you can. But ultimately, there's no getting around modeling. You just got to do it. And some people will be faster with some tools and some will be faster with others. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But it takes time no matter what. So did you see that smooth little pan I was doing in Unreal Engine just now? Let me show you how I was doing that. Man, this thing has some weight to it. Ooh, wow. That feels so premium quality. So the guys from 3D Connection contacted me and said, hey, you could totally benefit from our space mouse. Can we send you one? I said, heck yes. And this thing's awesome. It helped me out a ton on this project, not only for navigation purposes, but also for recording cameras. It was awesome for that. It's just really cool to be able to use the space mouse to get around in Unreal Engine especially. Love it for that. So it's got like 6 axes that are very, very sensitive, and you can just really smoothly navigate, fly around your scene. And there's nothing cooler than doing that in Unreal Engine with real time. This is me testing it out on another project that I was fooling around with. It's just cool. Check out my link in the description if you want to get your own space mouse, which I highly recommend. It works in 3ds Max and all your other 3D modeling software as well. It's great. Speaking of things that are working great, I think my project is starting to look pretty promising. I placed a Megascans terrain in here and my sample mountains and some other Megascans objects, and I think this has a lot of potential.
Our 3D artist was full of foolish optimism. This quest was only beginning, and it would get much, much harder before the end. The environment would be an especially difficult task, but Adam had no way of knowing that at this moment. He is certainly no environment artist. Soon this project would bring him to the brink of utter ruin.
Okay, when this project was first suggested to me, I thought, that city is awesome. I can definitely tackle that, no problem. But the environment is actually going to be the harder part of this, because that I'm out of my league a little bit. That's all Unreal Engine stuff. Modeling, I can handle that, no big deal. But building out an environment in real time, that's something I haven't really had to do before. Because what am I? Who am I? I'm an Archviz artist, okay? So what I'm using Unreal Engine for is usually much smaller scenes that is focusing on a single building. This is a gigantic environment with an entire city in it, and the city is dwarfed by the environment itself. I'm building like a big old chunk of Gondor. Okay, so this is way beyond what I normally am comfortable with, and that's what I liked about this challenge, but also I was venturing into the unknown. So I enlisted the help of some more plugins. I got some Brushify packs, which claim to make it much easier to build out large environments in a realistic way. Of course, I needed to learn how to use that, so here I am testing it out, getting it all ready, and then later I will apply it to my scene and see how it goes. And Brushify does what it says it does, and it does it pretty well. It was actually very handy to be able to add the grass, add the rocks, add the cliffs, add the foliage even, add a bunch of mountains that came with it. All this stuff to build out your scene super quickly and easily. And it wasn't hard to learn. But as I'm doing this, I'm starting to think, I don't know if this is going to look cinematic enough. And the grass I thought looked cool, but I was like, I don't know how I'm going to manage rendering that much grass. So yeah, that was a little bit of foreshadowing. I was starting to get a feeling like this might be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be and harder than I want it to be. I don't know, it's a lot of grass, and we're talking about real time here. Not sure the best way to do this. So it was looking pretty good in my practice file, so I decided to apply it to my actual file and just keep moving forward with it. So I still have my placeholder mountains, I still have my Megascans terrain, so I'm gonna bring in my Brushify stuff and see if I can start bringing it all together and make it work. Maybe you can tell from the video, but I'm no pro at this part. And at this point I'm still in the experimental stages, where I'm trying to learn new stuff and apply them and practice them, and I actually have no idea if in the end it's all gonna work out. I'm actually still at a point where I could just give up on the whole thing if I'm not liking the way it's going. That said, I think that this particular thing that I'm trying to do might be kind of difficult for anybody because I'm seeing such a large plain of grass and terrain. You guys let me know in the comments if you know some better way to tackle this. Maybe some tips and tricks for how to render something this large with grass. With all these concerns still in the back of my head, I went to the comments and again took the advice saying, hey, choose your cameras earlier and focus on the details there, because I thought maybe that would help me not have to worry about this huge grass field in my rendering so much. And I could find some ways to sharpen the focus a little bit so I don't have to worry about such a big area. Speaking of advice from the comments, I have to share with you a little later some of the worst advice I've ever gotten, but it's so bad that it's also hilarious, from the comment section. Stay tuned for that. But about these camera shots that I'm setting up, yeah, I hate them. Not the camera shots themselves, but the way they're looking. I am not really confident in this project working out at this point. It does not look good to me. Camera shots are fine, but I am still very worried about this overall environment. I tried to dress it up by setting up cameras and adding detail in those areas, and that worked fine, but there's no way to get around that. I just need to make a better environment for this thing. I should just mention quickly that I purchased a new mountain pack and put some of those mountains in here, and I think the mountains are finally at a place that I like, so I'm gonna stop touching those. I also found a few cameras that I definitely like and will probably end up remaining until the end, and then I added a lot of Megascans details up close and personal with those cameras so that there can be more detail in the foreground for those shots, and I think that is working well too. So some things are working, but I still fear the overall effect simply isn't good enough. Okay everybody, I hope you're enjoying this process. I hope you're learning something, and I can't wait to show you the finished result. But in the meantime, if you are finding this valuable, if you are enjoying this video, enjoying my content, and want me to make more, if you think I've earned it, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And stay tuned to the end to find out how you can get this finished Minas Tirith model for yourself to play around with. Thanks, back to the video. One of the comments I got on Hogwarts was that my lighting was all too even and all the lights were the exact same intensity and all that, which I absolutely agree with. That's 100% right. I was just too lazy to do it kind of the right way and go in and change and vary all my lights. And in this one, obviously, I'm looking for some way to dress up my renderings a little better. And so I thought, okay, maybe with lighting, I can add some interest to the city. So in this case, I actually made a blueprint that would make it so that when my animations start, it randomly assigns different intensities to every light. Blueprints are awesome for this kind of stuff. It helps the lazy guy like me easily add some variation. I actually made a couple different material functions for that light too, so that the color and intensity kind of flickers a little bit as it goes, so it looks more like a flame. And those are assigned randomly to the lights throughout my scene as well, so that each one flickers slightly differently. I thought it was a pretty clever little trick, but that's how I did the lights. So at this point I started playing with the animations more too, and I had to animate those lights kind of turning on and off, create some events for them. And they add some interest, and it's nice, but what's really cool is animating the overall environment lighting. Those ultra dynamic skies were really killing it, and you can animate the time of day and all that stuff, and you can see everything kind of looks pretty good from this angle. The grass is working in the foreground, in the background it disappears, and it's very hard to make it render throughout the whole scene at the same time, but when you're down low like this, it kind of works. So this was encouraging. I like what I'm seeing here. But I wasn't done with that grass yet. It would cause me many more problems still. Speaking of problems, materials was another one that I didn't quite know how to tackle because, again, it is going to tile over a humongous amount of surface, and I need to not be seeing massive repeats. And I also need to see all that grime and dirt on the city. If you look from the film, from the far out shots, it very much has this age to it, and creating that is going to be really hard. In V-Ray, I had the V-Ray dirt material, which is kind of a collision detection, and so in all the cavities and things, you can make it darker or add dirt there. That's really handy. I couldn't find a good way to recreate that in Unreal Engine, and it was bugging me because I really needed something like that. I eventually figure out something later, and we'll talk about it later in the video, and I think it really helped. But at this point, I was just kind of lost about how I would tackle the materials overall. Okay, with all these issues I'm trying to tackle, not quite knowing how it's all going to come together, I decided now's a good time to take a break from that and go back to what I know, and that is creating the model in 3ds Max. At which point I realized I had made a big mistake here in that I hadn't been mapping and texturing my model as I was going. So now I had to go back and do a bunch of that just to get it up to speed on the UVW mapping and all of that. So I did that, and then moving forward, I basically ended up making a bunch of pieces of the city, all mapped with materials on them already, and then I just started copying those around in chunks and modifying them, basically just adding a bunch of detail to my city. Not paying too close attention to how it exactly is supposed to be, more like making a bunch of pieces like houses and buildings, and then just populating my city with it in a way that looks about right. If you get into the nitty-gritty details, it's not going to look exactly accurate, but again, that is not the point of what I'm trying to do. So the modeling isn't the sexiest part of this job, but it's necessary. So for your benefit, I'm going to do a super sped up time lapse of what I'm doing at this point, and eventually we arrive at something that is starting to look like a city, maybe even Minas Tirith.
Things seem to be going along smoothly at this point, but Adam knows in the back of his mind that he still has some major issues that he must confront. His landscape and his materials are both not working well, but worse than that, he has no idea how he is going to fix them. He is over 3 weeks into his quest, and he still cannot see a clear path to where he needs to go. In reality, he was about to face a setback that threatened to make him give up for good.
If I'm being completely honest, I'm really concerned that I've just been wasting my time because I don't know how I'm going to get this thing to look good, and I hate wasting my time. So this is one of those things where I've been spending a bunch of time modeling because that's comfortable for me, but at the same time, I was like losing sleep over how I'm going to get this all to work right. So I had to face it and just go back into Unreal Engine and start working it out. I had two major problems at this point. The landscape and the materials. The landscape, maybe you can see, I got a different landscaping pack that I think looked marginally better, but I was still having issues with the grass. So let's talk about the landscape first. The grass. The grass is the issue. I found that with grass, it looks okay, but whenever I tried to do test renderings, my computer would crash. I found a random video that helped me out. It said that I need to change one setting in my movie render queue. So I turned that off and I got past that problem. Problem number 2, at some point I realized it just doesn't look very good, and that is because it's not casting shadows. I'm using ray trace shadows in this scene, and as far as I can figure out, ray trace shadows are not compatible with the grass. If someone knows how to make that work, let me know, please, in the comments. So I turned off ray trace shadows, and now I could get it to render too. So I sent some test renders, and now the problem is there's flickering and the shadows look terrible because I had to turn off ray tracing. In the end, I ended up just having to do combinations of both, composite some things together in post to make it so a fully shadowed grass could go together with ray traced shadows. There was no easy and great solution to this, but I dealt with it. So this is me finally just buckling down on the landscape and making it right, going in, painting it how it needs to be, and I think it ended up looking pretty darn good. Maybe I don't have to quit and give up after all. After I got this worked out, big things started happening. I had the confidence to move forward, and I just started hitting it hard, getting done all the stuff I knew I needed to do to have some finished rendering. But before I get to that final push, I promised I would share with you my favorite comment of all time on any of my videos. Here it is. I don't know, man. YouTube is wild. So before we get to the materials, which I know I still have to tackle, of course, I still had a bunch of modeling to do, and so I went in and did all of that too. I eventually finished. This was a huge modeling job, like so big, and it was really just tedious, and I had to get through it. This is the raw footage of me and my reaction at the actual moment that I finished the model. Okay, so I had to handle the materials still. The way that I did that was, well, you can see here, I went into Substance and added some extra grunge and cracks and age and those kind of things. But the more important thing that I figured out was using material attributes in Unreal Engine and turning these into blend materials so I could blend this stone with different grunge maps on top of it, basically. And I made several different versions of that and then applied them randomly throughout my scene to the stone buildings and walls. This added enough variation that things started to look good. But there's one other thing that was bugging me all along, and it had to do with the way the materials were appearing, but it wasn't actually in the material controls. It was ambient occlusion. When I look at a giant white city, I need the cavities and the crevices and all of that to read darker, because otherwise when you get far out, it just doesn't read at all. The problem is that with Lumen, which I am using for this project to light my scene, you can't use screen space ambient occlusion. But I really wanted to, because yeah, there's global illumination going on, but I still wanted that ambient occlusion to make my edges and my crevices read better. So once again, a totally random video on the internet helped me out. It showed me how to use some console commands to override Lumen's tendency to ignore screen space ambient occlusion, and I got it enabled with Lumen. This made a huge difference. And I'm going to save the final reveal on how that all looks for, well, the final reveal of the overall video. But you can see that I'm also doing a few other things here to polish up that final look. And that is like adding that last bit of detail using decals, copying around my lights, adjusting all my materials till they're perfect. Just adding those last little tiny things, small details that make a large difference, especially when I'm looking at this thing from far away as an overall city. You hardly even see these things, but you can tell the difference. And if you're not careful, this last 10% of detail or whatever can take you basically forever. Like this is never done. I could continue to add detail forever, but I got it to a point using decals and a bunch of other techniques where I thought it was reading quite well. So we're getting very close. Okay, so I was ready to start rendering some previews of this thing, and I did. FYI, they were taking about 2 hours per rendering with my temporal anti-aliasing set at 8. And I didn't really like the way, I loved the camera shots, but I still didn't like the look of the materials, basically. That's when you saw me go in and add all that extra detail and also figure out that ambient occlusion thing. But I did do a little experimenting with color grading and some time remapping in After Effects, which after I render again, it will still apply. But I want to kind of show you the difference of that last bit of detail. On the left, you can see the ambient occlusion is going and all those decals and other material changes I did are applied. And you can see it looks a lot more defined, a lot more detail, a lot more grunge. And on the right side, it just kind of gets lost because it's all white and you just don't see a lot of that detail, even though it's in the model. So I really liked that I finally figured that part out because I think it improved the look quite a bit. And now it's just a matter of getting all my sequences right and then rendering some finals, finally. So to add a little bit of life before rendering to the scene, I added some Niagara smoke. I added a bird generator. I set up 21 sequences of cameras that I wanted to render. Ran them all through After Effects. Used some of the sequences, didn't use others. Here is the final result. I hope you like it. Enjoy. Okay, guys, whew, it is done. That was a huge undertaking for me, and I'm really excited with the results. I thought this was great. Hopefully you found something that you like too in the process and in the finished result. If you like this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let me know what else you'd like to see me do in the comments. But seriously, let me know in the comments. I've been trying to respond to all the comments. Appreciate all the good feedback. Don't appreciate the haters as much. The ones that are like, this isn't even as good as a movie studio could produce. Like, yeah. Speaking of that, this was one guy, me, for probably, on this one I estimate about 45, 50 hours. This was a big one. My budget was about $0. So yeah, it's not as good as movie studios, duh. But it was a lot of work for me, and I think the end result was pretty rad. If you want to support me, or if you need to learn any of the software that I use, 3ds Max, V-Ray, Unreal Engine 5, and others, check out my courses down below in the links. I actually have over 200,000 students worldwide on various different platforms. So check that out. Super cheap always. I think it's an amazing bargain. And also, if you want to try this model out for yourself, I'm making it available for sale for $5. Check the links down below. You can grab the model of Minas Tirith and do whatever you want with it. I would love to see you guys create something really cool with it as well. Once you make something cooler than I did, you can hate on me in the comment section as much as you want. Okay, as always, thanks a ton for watching, especially if you made it all the way from the beginning till now. Appreciate it always. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.